Hi, I'm Dale McGowan. Welcome to Parenting Beyond Belief. One of the things I think parents recognize really early on is that our kids tend to imitate us. They tend to imitate everything we do and even imitate our opinions. They start walking like us and using the words that we use, including some colorful ones on occasion, and they'll also start to reflect our political opinions. Through the most astonishing coincidence, they tend to support the presidential candidates that we support, and they tend to spout the same religious views or worldviews that we support. This is an inevitable consequence of what they have to do as children. It's really an evolved tendency. They have to absorb, they have to be like sponges in order to go in 6,000 days from a drooling newborn infant to a fully functioning adult. They cannot actually critically assess everything that comes before them. So they have to absorb without question a great deal of the things that they have to master. This is kind of unsettling to a lot of free thought parents. I know it's something that made me uncomfortable, certainly around election time. To hear my kids beating the drum for my candidate and knowing very well that a large part of the reason that they were doing that is because their mom and dad supported that candidate. And that if we had a different candidate in mind, they would almost certainly have been beating the drum just as loudly for that one. So one of the things that we have to do is recognize that that's normal and that it's necessary, but at the same time try to prevent using it inappropriately, really using it in a way that's going to, in the long run, keep our kids from thinking for themselves. One of the ways we can do this is by recognizing that this absorption phase of childhood, let's say the first 12 years or so, is followed by a separation phase. Between 12 and 18, developmental psychologists and anybody who's been awake notices that children begin to pull away from the influence of their parents. They begin to dispute, sometimes seemingly for the sake of disputation, whatever it is that their parents believe or say. That is also a normal and important part of child development. Once they've absorbed a certain amount of information, they have to begin defining their own personalities and their own opinions separate from us. That's the separation phase. And the best thing we can do to allow our kids to think for themselves and to build critical thinkers for a lifetime is to constantly keep that separation phase in mind during that earlier absorption phase. So what can we be doing in the long run to allow our children to pull away from our influence even as they are soaking it up like sponges during those early years? This is actually a question that I frequently get from non-religious parents. They say, I don't want to have my kids indoctrinated into a religious point of view, but I'm just as serious about not indoctrinating them into my own point of view. How do I go about that? And a number of parents I've talked to are so concerned about this that they don't even tell their children what it is they believe. They hide their own worldview from their kids because they're so anxious about indoctrinating. Now what they've done, and what I think is very, very common, is they have mixed up the ideas of indoctrination and influence. We are going to influence our kids as parents, and we should. That's our primary responsibility, is to influence them and to do it well. But we do not have to indoctrinate them. That's something that has a much narrower definition. By separating those two out, we can get at the bottom of this question. And the question comes up all the time. About 2 years ago, I think, after Parenting Beyond Belief came out, there was a blogger in Australia. He was a blogger with the Sydney Morning Herald and wrote a parenting blog called Who's Your Daddy? It was really a terrific blog. But in response to the book and an interview that I gave with the Sydney paper, he said, what McGowan doesn't seem to realize is that an atheist parent is indoctrinating a child every bit as much as a religious parent is. Now, I actually wouldn't have quibbled with that if he had said they are in just as much danger of indoctrinating. But he actually said that they are both indoctrinating, and that's kind of a depressing point of view. What he's essentially saying is that you can't help indoctrinating your kids. They are going to be indoctrinated no matter what you try to do. Now, I think we can debunk that idea by taking the word apart and looking at the definition. Indoctrination actually has a very specific definition. Indoctrination is the presentation of a single point of view and the demand that that point of view be accepted. Frequently, it'll be backed up by a system of rewards and punishments. But the idea here is that, one, you're presenting only one point of view, and two, you are insisting that it be accepted. Now, I know a lot of religious parents, personally, who indoctrinate their kids whether they intend to or not. And they do it by presenting only a single point of view and by suggesting directly or indirectly that it's not okay to diverge from that point of view, that you wouldn't be a good person if you diverge from it, or that you will receive some of the dandy punishments that are on offer for diverging from it. Now the fact is, I also know atheist parents who do the same thing, who make it really clear that they consider all religious people to be stupid, that they consider religion to be uniformly evil, and that any religious expression whatsoever would be something that they would sneer at. Now that's not a child who's going to be able to even-handedly assess whether or not they want to adopt a religious point of view. So essentially, that is a process of indoctrination. You're presenting them with a non-religious perspective, and you're saying, if you go into something else, I'm going to think you're dumb, or I'm not going to support you in the same way. So either side is capable of indoctrinating, but both sides are also capable of influencing a child without indoctrination. Now, the way to achieve influence without indoctrination is very straightforward. You present your point of view, you let your kids know what you believe, but then you also say, as often as you possibly can, there are other good people who believe differently, and you invite them to seek those people out. So when one of my daughters came to me a few years ago and said, "Do you think Jesus really rose from the dead?" I said, "I don't think so. I think it's a story that's meant to make us feel better about death. I think it was made up for that purpose. But you know what? I know that Grandma Barbara believes differently. I know that she thinks that Jesus really did rise from the dead. So why don't you talk to her sometime about that? And then you can make up your own mind and even change your mind 1,000 times if you want." Now that is no more or less than I would ask from a religious parent. If a religious parent said, "Yes, I believe that Jesus rose from the dead, but you know what? Your Uncle Norm doesn't think he did. I really think you ought to go talk to him sometime and see what it is that he believes." Imagine if all children were given the invitation to actually seek out alternate worldviews like that and to make up their own minds in the long run. Now, still, the parent is going to have the stronger influence. There is no doubt about that. But once the child enters that separation phase, if they have been given this explicit invitation to differ and to think for themselves, they're much more likely to do so and to not have the baggage and the fear of differing from mom and dad. That is influence without indoctrination, and that's what parents need to be about, regardless of their worldview. There's even a bit of an inside joke in our family, because whenever I do express a religious opinion or a metaphysical opinion or something like that, I will quickly follow it up by saying, "Now that's just my opinion. And there are lots of other good folks who believe otherwise, and I want you to make up your own mind on this." And it's funny that we finally gotten to the point where after I give an opinion, and I start in on the caveat, "Now, I want you to make up your own mind," my kids will go, "I know, I'm supposed to make up my own mind." So that's when I know, that's when I'm actually confident that I've reached the point where I am not indoctrinating these kids. They know as clearly as they could possibly know that they are free to make their own choices in the long run. So I'm going to influence them, I've got to acknowledge that and be comfortable with it, but I also know that in the long run they are very much invited and very much aware that they can make up their own minds. Okay, I hope that's been helpful in some way in helping parents to sort through this idea of indoctrination versus influence. One of them is bad, something we definitely want to avoid, and the other one is something that is inevitable and good. If we do it the right way, we can keep our kids absorbing our influence, but at the same time feeling free to find their own way as well. Some of the upcoming videos we have, I'm going to talk about the question, what if my child becomes religious? Very, very common question that we get. Another one is taking a look at the moment of the question. How can parents best handle questioning moments from their kids? We'll look at a few myths associated with the idea of death and the non-religious. And then also, how can you begin to introduce the idea of evolution to your young kids? I'm Dale McGowan, and I'll see you next time on Parenting the